there, Frode.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very good. I'm just having to really quickly reply to an email.
No worries. I'm running around a little bit too.
Okay. We're happy to Scottridge. Hang on. Oh.
How are the PhD preparations?
Stressful. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, there's Chris. Very good. Yeah. So today, I don't think Peter will be able to join us, and Adam will definitely not be able to join us. He has something else he needs to do, unfortunately. So, Brendan, I saw your email about Otter, which is really cool.
Yeah, I did a little bit of training on the model.
By the way, have you guys met, Brendan, Chris?
No, I don't believe we have. Hello, Chris.
Well,
So I'll introduce you first, Chris, and then you can take over your introduction. But Chris is also at my university, and I can say that for another 2 weeks now, my university.
and if you graduate, it counts as your university indefinitely.
Yeah, but in a very different way. Then it's kind of they start.
Keep
I've already
asking you for money,
started
yeah,
saying
keep asking you for
alumni
money.
things. Yeah, exactly. You know, now that you're graduating, give us lots of money, which is crazy. Yeah, so Chris and I have been in dialogue for a long time and built a few things together, and I'm very grateful that he's here. And yeah, that's all really. Chris, over to you.
Had quite a few fights. Usually quite ones that when we resolve them are quite constructive.
No comment.
But yeah, I have to be careful because I get very excited about things and so I'm quite cautious about overcommitting. We built a few things. What I've been looking at this week as just a little hobby thing is, well, my first job was a web sys programmer, so setting up websites, servers, building systems. And so I thought, while I believe documents should have metadata attached to them. Whether or not it should be visual at the end of the document is an argument for another day. But that aside, the mechanism for creating a visual meta from a normal PDF is really not that complicated, and it's achievable with standard tools, but it's a load of just extra learning curve. So what I've been having a go at, and I've got distracted by my day job this week, sadly, but is writing something that on a Linux command line. Sorry, I don't know your background, Brendan. So if I say Linux command line, do you sort of go? You install a bunch of yum packages and then run this script, and it'll take a PDF and a JSON file containing some metadata, and it will produce you the PDF with a few pages at the back with the metadata as visual meta laid out legally. That is just one of those. It won't be good, it won't be complete, but it means that the barrier could be very low. And one of the things I used to do was work on repository software for universities to publish the research papers online. And the political side of this is quite controversial because people get touchy about altering documents, and it breaks Creative Commons no derivative works and things to add anything to a document. But from a technical point of view, it's really easy. So writing something that could just then create a version of an uploaded document that had that on the end becomes very easy if we've already got a command line tool that does it. So I'm trying to look at things that would lower the barrier for people trying stuff out, because that seems like something I can do. It's my comfort zone. I can make a GitHub page with some scripts and instead of instructions on a Red Hat box, you follow the instructions, you now can make visual meta PDFs with basic metadata in for very little overhead. The other thing I've been talking to Frode about is validators, because humans hate being told they're wrong by other humans. And anytime I work with a new technology and put stuff online, a smug postgrad used to email me to tell me, you're technically wrong. and then I would do all the work to make myself technically right. And so, what are you using it for? I'm not. I thought you just like to know. It was like, so it's much more useful, but it's much less emotionally stressful to have a validator tell you you're wrong 50 times than a human tell you you're wrong once. So I think that will be quite a useful thing. Just, you've created a visual meta file, or so you think, upload your PDF to here and we'll tell you what we think you said. Cat.
Yeah, that's neat. Really cool to hear. The cutting down friction to creating documents that can actually talk to each other, or at least store provenance, is very near to me. So yeah, that sounds pretty tremendous. What's your status on this right now? How far along are you?
Let's see. Let me go and look at that window. Let me tab through all of the shell connections, SSH connections I've got to various servers. It was on my Sandbox VM server. Our data center, for reasons best known to our our infrastructure team, is shutting down over Christmas. So for 3 days between Christmas and New Year, because as a university, we kind of can shut something off and no one really cares. We've only just told the academics now that we've got a 3-day outage of everything, but dev and pre-prod go off first and come on last. So the production systems will only be down for 3 days at most, but my Playpen server that I could noodle on stuff on will be down for about 2 weeks, because it's the first thing they shut off and the last thing they turn back on. So that's annoying. So it means I'll have to actually not work at Christmas like I'm supposed to. So literally, I'm at the point where I have like commands that will, he says, looking at literally my history here on the.
So Brenda, Chris is just joining us, and Chris is my friend and colleague from Southampton, and he is talking about doing 2 things. 1, getting visual meta onto documents where there was none, and 2, validation stuff. And then also Brendan has looked at some interesting transcription stuff for us. So that's kind of the beginning of today, and then a little update on yesterday.
Cool. Yeah, there's a command called PDF Unite, which you give it 2 PDFs and it gives you 1 PDF back. So, and I'm going to go, trying to find a way to turn programmatic text into well-formatted PDF, and I've gone back to the original way of doing it, which is to say I'm just going to write it in LaTeX and then compile it into PDF. So I'll write something that creates visual meta in LaTeX, which is easy to do because it's a text file. There's programs that can turn a LaTeX file into a PDF file, and programs that can merge 2 PDF files. So it's just going to be daisy chaining those tools together. So there's basically no surprises here. It just involves you typing a load of yum install commands and waiting half an hour or less on a fast connection.
So yesterday, on a different level, was the publication of the book, of course. And that went well, except when I got an email from Stephen Fry this morning saying, this is great, but you know, it doesn't download, right? So that was very unpleasant. So I went on the Dropbox, and I could see that it didn't have the right permissions, but I couldn't change them. And then, of course, I have a server, but you know, when you're using a hosted server, just to find the right directory to do the FTP to, and then, you know, that's relatively simple. But then to actually find the way to get it afterwards, that was 15 minutes of extreme pain. Anyway, it's all working, it's all uploaded, so he's happy, everybody's happy. The DOI has still to be properly resolved. I have an account with Crossref, so it should work, but there is this, that, and the other, just more gumming up the works for stuff that should be smooth. And Vint and Ismail and I, we did an 1.5-hour panel for the summit of the book yesterday, which was interesting, interesting people. And next week, it looks like Vint and I will do another kind of outreach or marketing, or however we should call it, for the kind of work we're doing here. So other than being super stressed with the PhD, it's a good day.
Good. Nice little congrats.
You're not super stressed with the PhD, you're doing it wrong at this stage.
So Brendan, you've done some really interesting stuff, but before we go into that, this is so cool. Brendan and Brandel. You could be like a tongue twister if you're in the same sentence. I'll try not to do that.
I like that.
Any update from you, Randall?
I haven't done anything interesting this week. A friend of mine released a video game, and so I played it so that I could talk to him about it, and I treated that like a full-time job. But I'm very interested in returning to the transcript discussion that we started last week, trying to come up with time codes related to those things. I'm looking to try to get some of that done now that I've broken the back of the obsession there. But yeah,
Well,
nothing more to report on my part, but beyond that at this point.
but before
Out of curiosity,
on that,
what's the game?
sorry, yes, question.
Yeah, it's called Survive Icarus, made by some friends down in Dunedin in New Zealand. And so I was very interested to play it because I haven't played a lot of video games in the last while. So going straight from something like Minecraft, which is interesting, but a good 12 years old now, to Icarus was very entertaining.
That's cool. Is it publicly released, or was this like a? Oh, nice.
Yeah, no, it's on Steam. It's a
Cool.
it's a real game dev studio that they've managed to prop up in our hometown, which is very nice.
Oh, amazing.
So,
You're
Brandon, what do you
from
think of the
Dunedin?
Mac rumors, leaks, or things about Apple VR?
I am not allowed to talk about rumors.
Oh no, but is it annoying? I'm not saying asking you to validate them, but is it annoying that it's coming out, or how do you feel about it?
The rumors? Well, I mean, Apple has a whole spiel about being able to control the conversation that I generally sympathize with. I think that there are a lot of things that technology media does to narratives, and that it's very useful actually to be able to have holistic control over those things. And the canonical example I talk about is the iPhone 5C, where people glommed onto it saying that the C was for cheap. And I'm inclined to agree that the product was a really interesting one, but it was kind of killed in the press because of the way that the expectations were set, based on thinking of it as a different thing than it really was going to be pitched as. So I think that the annoyance aspect of it is reasonable. I think that there are a lot of disservices that the professional media does to products when they evaluate them without having the chance to see what they really are. And
For sure.
yeah.
No, that's all. I felt it was quite nice to see. I'm not competent enough to even comment on the rumors, but that there's more stuff being discussed, a little bit of hype. I think that in itself is good.
Yeah, it's also interesting seeing that the lines that our executive team take. Obviously, they are allowed to talk for the company, and the timing of the things that they say at various points in the past are very interesting to read into, and so people's commitment to things like television in the past, how that's gone hot and cold at times, how people have talked about artificial intelligence, how people have talked about their commitment to the interesting augmented reality that you can do with the phone. They're all neat, and I'm glad that they reflect confidence that the company has in a long-term roadmap. The fact that Augment AR Kit was actually available on iPhone 6 at first was really cool, because it meant that it's a technology that the infrastructure and plumbing was in for many generations before the current, whereas we've just seen today that, yesterday is that Oculus with Meta has said that they will discontinue support for the Quest 1 headset in the chat environment, and as of January, even though that device is only a few years old, and there's not a great reason for it. But yeah, in general, I like what Apple is able to do with technology. I like its commitment to the long-term timeframes to make sure things work, and also to the fairly overzealous backward compatibility they have. I've never had a device I needed fall outside of its sort of usability range for updates for OSs and things like that, and I take that as heartening for for anything that will seem to come in the future.
Yeah, agreed.
So Brendan, I hope you don't mind. I shared the link in the chat.
Yeah, no problem.
So you want to take over, explain and entertain.
Sure. Nothing too special with this. I know that many of you are familiar with different transcription tools. One that I use is Otter AI, and just to test kind of the legibility of our recordings and try to start training the model on different voices. I went through it was about a month ago, from 12 November 2021 to just transcribe and kind of assign speakers and do a little bit of vocab programming into the tool. So just common words that come up, visual meta, future of text, different concepts that we typically touch on. It's nothing too advanced by any means. And for an hour-long call, it's about 45 minutes of work, just kind of speeding through it. So I get the sense that doing this for a handful of different recordings that we have, just kind of some manual legwork to kind of get this up to speed, to have the text reading correctly, to have all the speakers assigned, wouldn't be that challenging. And if we got just a handful of these, just based on some of my other trials with other projects, we can build up a pretty robust library of like dictionaries of how we speak. So I listened to the call. This really stemmed from your guys' call on Monday. I was unable to make it, but really touching on the aspects that you talked about, Brandel, of how we can navigate some of the technology to identify keywords that might be coming up. I think it was inverse document search or something along those lines. There's a lot with this idea, which is kind of like common words that come up in our talking. Frode, we've talked before about the idea of, oh, that's interesting. Saving off that clip and then being able to almost bring that into a kind of like a highlight reel, show reel of all things that we find interesting. Really, really interesting to me, because in dialogue, those are different points that are all kind of like aha moments for us. So this is just a start, but I wanted to share this with you so we could see, can we use this technology to move forward with the community?
Chris, Brandel, have you both clicked through to have a look at the? It's pretty cool, right?
I don't know what I'm clicking through to look at.
Oh, there's a chat in.
Sorry.
And it's us saying stuff.
It wasn't a full meeting. It was probably like 5 or 6 of the regular bunch of maybe 10 to 12 of us. So I would want to make sure that we touch on things. For instance, we could do the Monday call. There was a good crowd there. But yeah, the idea here is, can we almost get our voices programmed in so it is just something that's bootstrapped so that we can build on this later.
So what you're saying?
I just realized it has people's names in. Yeah, so I'm so used to seeing transcriptions, I didn't actually clock that. So that's the new thing.
So Brendan, at this point now, for example, you and me, would it recognize our voices? Have you done enough training?
We can give it a shot. Right after this call today, I'll dump the recording in here, and we could do so. I think so. Usually it only needs like, at least with my experience with Otter, I don't actually know how the model is trained. It needs like 5 different points of hearing our voices, and then it is pretty lockstep. Like it's not gonna get things too wrong. I use this in my research project, and for instance, there's 3 different people who are constantly interviewing, and usually we're kind of interacting within the call, and it is, I don't know, it's probably not 100% perfect, but it's damn near close. So building that kind of voice recognition over time, pretty easy to do. The other kind of trick in the back end that they do is dictionaries. So we can dump in our own language in there. Should be very helpful for just, kind of different slicing and dicing of the data.
Yes, another question becomes, why? Why do we want this? We know we do, but it's probably an interesting thing to look at. So for the Future of Text Volume 2, which was published yesterday, I love saying that. Can only say it for one day. We have the full transcript with human help at the back, which I think is done very nicely. Still, he had to take quite a lot of time for some people to understand their accents and also to understand some of the terms they used because of context, which is of course what you're talking about now with dictionaries or so on. But the reason I wanted to have it in the book is things like you come across something, you select the do Command F or whatever equivalent in your PDF reader, and you can see that it wasn't only in articles, it was actually discussed in the meeting. That's kind of my primary use case. And of course, that only works on actual texts. Sometimes you want it to work on similar text. So maybe we should start having, maybe in addition to a dictionary, think about a way to have a thesaurus somehow. Like when we talk about Doug or Doug Engelbart, it's the same, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And there's no programming being done at all on this. So, any kind of work writing some functions on top of this would probably enable a much more robust experience. Purpose-wise, why personally I find this important. There were two aspects from the call on Monday that really stood out. Peter saying, why not make this a 300-year community? And I think that aligns with everyone who comes into this room, this virtual room. We all agree that we hope that we can lay a foundation for people in the future, because there are far too many documents that get lost or links get broken, et cetera. So being able to build up a corpus of knowledge that future technologists can build off of, very helpful. There's also just a ton of interesting design discussion that goes on in here that most people aren't exposed to. So being able to gather and then use that information, I'm very keen on. Plenty more that I can dive into from the Monday call, but I'll kind of cede the floor for the moment.
I mean, one of the things that's really useful regarding what you said is for a student to be able to cite, or an academic to be able to cite what one of us said.
Yeah.
And have that in a format that is useful and academically robust and somehow links back to the video, right, as well.
Yeah, a huge thing is just, being able to encompass context when you're looking back on something. And I can't remember who said this earlier, but well, it ties in kind of what you were saying for the thesauruses. So if we say Doug, we want that to link to Doug Engelbart, but there's even interesting research around gesture. So like physical gesture and communication.
Is there really? Do you think so?
I do think so.
Randell's got millions of thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear them. But there's interesting research around this with regards to how there's been some studies around design sketching and communication of ideas in small design groups, and how gesture, physical gesture when talking actually enables comprehension. So being able to go back on that and see us talking through an idea is another kind of layer of embedded information that someone can take away.
Wow, I can imagine something as simple as, I move my finger here to draw a box. Somehow the system knows that's what I'm doing now. I'm not just pointing. And then I can assign that box is a movable object, but this thing isn't. And then we can, I can illustrate a point, maybe like the discussions we have with Adam, like that should go here.
Mm.
It seems like a very VR kind of thing, but it should also work in this environment potentially.
VR whiteboard, basically. Or like a Connect sort of level.
Mm.
Yes, Ken Parlin from NYU has a really interesting, I would say project rather than software platform at this point, but it's very cool, called Chalk Talk, which is very much centered around being able to draw. So I think, is typically using a pen, but it has the ability to interpret the symbols. There's a lexicon of gestures to more semantically relevant objects, like things like time series that he can compose and construct. He's
sorry.
No, sorry. I think Mark, were you going to say something? Or no? Okay, I thought somebody said. And it's really interesting. And I'll also link in here because I think I've sent to Frode, but I haven't shown other folks the Leap motion powered text editor that I created that is along those lines.
What I was going to say was it would be very useful to people who can't see or have bad eyesight, like Frode shrugged.
Absolutely.
So you just get people call, yeah, I mean, that kind of automatically, like, they're shaking their head, which is very important to people do without meaning to on video chats.
Yeah.
Yeah, the video that Brandel just shared now is really, yeah, it's basically what I would say what Lawnmower Man would have wanted to be. I know Lawnmower Man is a long time ago, but it was poetically showing a direction somewhere, and this thing is just really wonderful.
Thank you. The other thing that I wanted to mention as referencing sort of citation is we have, as you probably recall, actually, Frode, anybody who's worked at Apple in the last 30 years has had to deal with Radar, which is an application. It's about the kindest thing you can say about it, and it's where all of the bugs are, all of the discussions of how things are planned, and it's the source of truth for what is a plan for a product, what is the plan for a piece of software, and so recently we were talking in our team about what some other team was doing, and we said, where can you, like, I'm sure somebody's told you this in a chat message, but you need to find the source of truth for it. And so I had to go digging through Radar to figure out whether this was said in an official venue. I found the Radar. One of the things that it was linking to was, now that we have a web-based chat platform, to the chat conversation about the plan. So now the Radar is actually citing a conversation in a chat platform. And I thought that was really a revolutionary moment for me, because it means that it becomes part of an official corpus in a way that ephemera never would have been before, because this was almost certainly, I mean, you can use chat programs in all sorts of different ways. Some people can actually use them in official conversation, official sort of dialogues and carefully plan things out. For the most part, that's not what we do. It's not what we're doing here. That's not what I'm doing. I apologize to everybody else if that's what they are. And so the idea that people can actually create citations to a random conversation to be able to search in that way, I think is really amazing. So I think that's very much in line with what you're saying, Brendan, and I for one look very much forward to it.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think the power of tapping into the provenance, being able to go back to the actual origin point of where something might have been communicated, even if it's not we can't imagine it's like the global origin point, but in the local environment that we're in, it's the origin point. So how can we call on that and then be able to cite and build atop that? That's very interesting, because we have 2 of these calls each week. In the future, there's going to be kind of an expert in here on a monthly basis. There's surely going to be some information that comes from those that might spark our own innovations in this group, and being able to track back to those points, very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because even if the point in the conversation is not the point where a decision was formalized, often the formalization of the decision actually never gets captured. You see the output of the formalization, but actually at least knowing that it arose or it got on its way to a decision point in the conversation is still actually remarkably useful. And I can understand sort of the case that Brandel's mentioning. Yeah, when someone said, well, it can't be that hard, just go away and find it out. Stepping back to the point about gestures, I just have one thought: is how universal are gestures? I don't know, but I mean, before You know, this is the problem with untested assumptions. Is the fact that we can capture gestures is are they reasonably expected to be common across all the participants? I certainly don't know that to be a fact.
No, I don't either.
They're definitely cultural.
I thought so, yeah.
For anybody who's been to Bulgaria before.
If do you know Yvonne Howard? Works in your lab. If anyone ever goes into it anymore, I seem to recall she did a project that I think it was her that was around looking at emojis in different countries, and like literally some things are really offensive in some countries. I think specifically there was a symbol for eating, which had someone eating with their left hand, and what are you doing? Eating food with your left hand? You're disgusting. I think it's your left hand that you're not supposed to eat with food in India. And
it's not India, Chris. It's a Muslim thing, and it's because you use that for the toilet and you use your right hand to be clean. I made that mistake in Indonesia at a roadside restaurant. I thought everybody was so impressed that Emily and I was there, but then I realized I was eating with both hands and I got very embarrassed and actually sat on my left hand for the rest of the meal.
Well,
yeah.
As a left-hander, there goes my future.
But exactly, I mean, it is one of those. But there are cultural. I mean, effectively, you can have cultural. What do you call it when you regional localization? Same way that we do with spelling. That you know that we're both using a mixture of American English and English, but in this we probably understand that we will have that the transcription will be localized for one area. I mean, if I said the word color, how do you spell it?
I'm from New Zealand, so so
no,
there's only one real American in here.
What I mean is, how does your machine spell it? Is the main thing, because I mean, the obvious thing is just analyze everyone's accent, work out where they grew up, and work out their gestures and spelling they would be using. That should be easy.
Well, that's very interesting, Chris. It really is. And also it may pave the way for phonetic writing. You know, because the question is how we choose to go. So what is the use case for this? It is search through different means. It is browse, read, and cite, like any other material, right? And those issues have very different effects on different parts of the project. If we want to find out when someone talked about color, ideally, spelling shouldn't matter. It should have both spellings when it does the search, ideally speaking. But, you know.
Yes.
Well, as long as the person who's actually sort of, because at some point, I think normally there needs to be some human at some point in the process, at least to do that, because I don't think, I mean, once you tell it that these things are synonyms, and there may be libraries you can look up, but I do think that's the classic case where you want a bit of adult supervision early in the process, because just assuming whatever library you clagged onto the system is going to do it for you, I think is a fool's errand.
See, now we're getting into the work a little bit just conceptually with some friends, California people, a couple of years ago on a timeline project. And I know most people have gone through timelines in different ways. Brandel, you certainly have implemented as well. The idea for us came from my former professor who was really clever, saying something that sounded stupid. He said, GPS has really revolutionized stuff. You know, what's the equivalent in text? And I said, well, there is no landscape for text. Then I realized there's time. Time is, for the sake of human experience, relatively immutable. So then we looked at how can we be able to overlay anything we want. So the interesting idea was to be able to zoom into Planck time if you wanted to illustrate something, and then zoom out to any level. Also how you have different issues with overlapping times, but you know, the Apple Watch has solved a lot. The improvements in NTP has been immense. There are so many things that can happen, but what really can happen is you can do a hard thing, which as in a, not difficult, but a hard thing, like every frame in a video recording has a time code. So that's when it was recorded. That's useful. But then there's
very silly, sorry.
Yes, Mr. Silly.
I had a very silly corollary to that, which I've just finished listening to a Dungeons and Dragons, very light-hearted podcast that ran for 3 years. I listened to it all in the last 6 months. So I started listening of recordings that was a couple of years old. And in one of the first episodes, one of them appears from the future to give them a message. And they're sort of, well, that was confusing, but okay, I didn't really follow that bit. And then right near the end of the story, they use a thing to go back in time and give themselves a message from the past. And they basically went back and edited it. So if you listen to the story, that happened.
That is really cool, lighthearted and very relevant. The only thing I was going to say is, these cameras, a normal camera can record breathing. There's a lot of stuff that can be analyzed from just a normal camera. So it can go back. Let's say one of us does something historic. They should be able to tell where we agitated at a certain point, whether like all these things we've talked about, right? You
want a webcam in the room where it happened.
Yeah. So I'm saying the text part of it is, of course, hugely useful. But from a historical point of view, all the other stuff is absolutely crucial. I mean, why did Brendan lean over the screen right there? That may or may not be relevant, right? We should try to keep all of this.
I was talking to someone who was an artist who was working on something, and they wanted to they were interested in the history of digital art, in the creation process and how a project could be recorded in a meaningful way for researchers to want to look back and see not just what you created, but how you created it, the times you spent working on it, what applications were used and things, without invading your privacy when you're not working on it, because you probably use the same computer for other things. And that was a JISC project a few years ago.
Yeah,
there's some really cool drawing apps on the iPad that create time lapses of what you create. I'm lacking the name right now off the top of my head, but my fiance's sister is a tremendous artist, and she'll show these as like the kind of steps to her creation process. Now it's all embedded in that app alone. It doesn't, take in, oh, I'm writing notes, or I saw this inspiration on YouTube. But even that feature alone is delightful. Like getting to see someone's process on how something's created. It's educational. It brings like a great joy in watching someone's work come together. And I would argue that's probably the case for many people.
I'm a bit wary on that, coming from an arts background. I'll tell you when I stopped being an artist.
I'll keep listening.
It was a very simple thing. I was in university, Syracuse, upstate New York, and doing photography, early digital art, basically taking a picture, doing filters on it, that kind of stuff. And then there was Playboy college girls signing. I decided that sounds exciting. So I went along, met one of the girls and said, hey, you should model for me. And she was like, yeah, whatever. Turned out later we had mutual friends. So she actually did end up modeling for me. It was all very nice, very artistic and all of that stuff. But then when I went through the imagery, there was one screenshot I did of a video of her just being arty that had by accident time code. It was kind of rough. And I said, that is meaningful. And then I had another photograph of her where she, with a bit of effect, she looked like she was in a Japanese painting. And I realized at that moment that I'm the only person in the whole world who knows which one I, as the artist, consider to be a cheap filter and which one has some meaning. And that's when I realized only an artist can judge the work in the art sense, not in a decorative or historic sense, obviously. So
I think text is more fragile in that sense, because when you watch someone doing drawing, even if they back up, say, and they use an eraser or something for a bit, there's more of a general flow. I'm always fascinated by the way the sort of technical answer to, we can do that with text. You just look at the character count. So, it's a bit like a wiki. You just look at the latest, you scrub along the line, but that's not actually how we assemble. We use units, we use words or possibly phrases, and there is no real meaning until the letters don't have a meaning, and they're not actually particularly useful, I think. There's a really lazy assumption that just being able to scrub along the production line of the letters being added but actually provides insight, and that's a crucial mistake at the moment that we haven't moved beyond.
But what I'm trying to explain by that story from why I changed my entire life around is that if everything that I had done before that was recorded for both of those images, it would have no value for anyone else. unless, you know, let's say I become really famous, sure, go back and have fun. But what I'm saying is that, you know, we record things for different reasons. And we should be kind of really conscious of that, because from an artistic point of view, you may end up doing something literally in an instant and be super happy with it. And then you spend forever working on something that becomes nothing. It's kind of an aside in the context of the importance of us trying to record everything and finding ways to get it. That was my brother calling. He's picking up my mother from the airport. I'm gonna have to call him back. I'll mute just for a second. So
I would, okay. On the subject of whether if people had that greater context and information that Frode would have been able to create as a consequence of just having more of his accommodating activities over the past, I would say I think there's a chance that one would. It's similar to there's a philosopher, disgraced philosopher, John Searle, who has this example, this thought experiment, the Chinese room, which is somebody who doesn't speak Chinese is stuck in a room, just pass symbols in, and they have an instruction book to pass symbols out, and the idea is that that's no different from a computer, because the person has no comprehension of it. Is the room intelligent? And the issue I take with that is that I can't see an instance in which that person wouldn't then learn Chinese. I think that's just what people do, is that if you have the ability to understand patterns and tendencies, then you have the tendency to be able to detect things within them. So whether somebody would get the exact readout of your particular stylistic interpretations and expectations of what's easy and what's hard is up to the quality, I would say, of the recording and the aptitude of the observer. But I would say, as a consequence of simply watching a movie where somebody's sense of aesthetics develops, that having the ability to see a longer run sort of sequence of those events would give us a pretty decent shot at deciding whether you thought something was art or not. And I think that's a really interesting sort of component as we're talking about things like breath, as things like hand gesture as being substantially meaningful. There are. Sure. I think that there are really incredible opportunities once we have these greater things, if we can encode them. I agree with Christopher that there are a number of limitations in terms of the cultural scalability of them, but we can at least encode them with the like explicit recognition of what they are. You know, as I was saying, like before with Bulgaria, anybody who's gone there, as particularly from outside of Europe, only to realize that a head nod is no and a head shake is yes, it's very entertaining. But you can still encode those things as a head shake and a head nod, and so that you have the capacity at least to be able to kind of identify what those mechanical actions are. And you know, things like Paul Ekman's work on the facial action coding system indicate things that where while the semantic meaning of all of those actions are not universal, those encodings are in terms of being able to say that they raised cheek raiser 2 for this duration. And so having some ability to map through at least reduces the complexity of the task of being able to say, like, given that this conversation is in English and not in Bulgarian, what is the likelihood that a nod is an affirmative, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that there are really, really interesting opportunities from that.
I think inherently in that, what that points to as well is that it points you towards having some sort of lexicon. So you can't recognize every gesture, or you can't necessarily recognize the multiple meanings of that gesture on a cultural basis. But so in a sense, part of the thing is saying, well, no, we can recognize these gestures and we have this range of meanings for them. So it's yet another thesaurus that comes out of this.
What's the difference between a gesture and an expression?
Hands and face, I would say.
If you wink, that's if I think they're basically just on I think they're on a spectrum. I don't think there's a hard line between them, is my point. I think that once you start doing that, you're also going to be registering emotion to some degree. Maybe macro reactions. People react. People make gestures as an emotional response, be them large or small. You know, that they don't do them consciously. They don't think, I'm going to do this. It's usually something they've developed as a habit. So
sorry that I'm tapping away. I'm not trying to ignore you guys. I just have to set up a meeting with Vint and someone, so it's kind of, I have to just respectfully hurry up. Sorry.
We need a gesture that typing in the conversation as opposed to typing outside the conversation.
Yeah. One thing, in a lot of online meetings I do with a certain popular protest group, there's a gesture for, there's a formal gesture for, I agree, but don't want to interrupt the person talking. Jazz hands is basically agreement with very high or very low being a sort of emphasis or de-emphasis, like, or, you know, like, but all of them are basically, when you have a group of 20 people who don't know each other on a Zoom chat, you really don't need everyone doing a round of applause or just saying things to say, yes, I agree, but it's a way on Zoom that works quite well. Yeah, and also this is easier to press than a button to show a reaction on the screen, which is in a sense what we're encouraged to do. You know, you can mouse through a menu and eventually find a thing, and the conversation's moved on by then.
I hope not, because I'm back.
This gets at something. This gets at something you mentioned last week, Frode, or in the Monday call about voice tapback. You were referring to kind of the addition to the iMessage of how that has cut out the friction of responding okay, just by putting a thumbs up. It's excellent. It's great. It affords a flow to conversation that's a bit different, and how it actually impacts your own life. Voice tapback in the context of our calls feels kind of similar to that. There is a lot of reinforcement. Occasionally you get a thumbs up, you get somebody signifying in some way. Chris, I'm sorry, I walked away, so I didn't see the gestures you were making, but presumably they're quite similar. Like there's a reinforcement.
Just hands, basically.
There you go.
And if you're an Extinction Rebellion meeting and if that suddenly happens, now you'll look cool and know what's going on.
Just keep your hands in your lap otherwise.
Well, Brendan, you know, it's more difficult, of course, in a voice meeting because it's easy to interrupt each other. You know, if you're talking and I say, yeah, you know, that is kind of an interruption as well as a tapback. But if the recordings are done on all different devices, then at least your audio will be clean. So there's an interesting technology that I learned about earlier today, actually, the BBC uses for interviews. They used Chrome. And so, you know, they use the web browser, take over everything, and they record everything locally at high quality while they have the conversation so that that high quality audio can then be shipped to make a radio thing. Right. And there's a lot of opportunity for what you can do there. But when we're talking about thesaurus kind of things earlier, maybe we should do audio thesauruses too, like anything from a grunt to an affirmative, that, you know, the kind of things that within our group mean that, because one of the key things this is for, I guess, is to help us avoid going through hours of video to find what we're looking for, right? So we should be able to, you know, the bit where these people were there was a lot of agreement, you know, to make these kind of shapes or queries out of it.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
No, I do quickly say, because one other thing that occurs to me in this is, of course, these conversations. I mean, there are 5 of us here, and that's probably okay to effectively all sit on open mic without too much over talking. But often the conversations get a bit asynchronous because by the time it's sort of, you know, one sort of politely waited turn, that the point you're going to make is sort of some while back. It's still germane, but it's then got to be threaded back because that might be an important part of it. So it's been displaced in time from the part of the conversation it belongs to, especially if there's no further comment based on it. In other words, that thread doesn't continue further forward, but you just got this little side branch that occurs, you know, maybe minutes later in the timeline.
So,
sorry, Brendan.
So Mark, I know you've been in the armed forces, so have I. Anyone else? So in the armed forces, we have, as everybody knows, different levels of groups. You know, you have battalions and armies and stuff, but you also have squads. So a squad is roughly generally 7 people, right? Is that your experience too, Mark?
Oh, well, sailors work differently, but
I know
probably
you were Navy man, so
Yeah.
you know you were more like who could fit in the boat. But the reason I'm saying it is what you said is really, really important point. If we have a meeting that's maybe 7, 8 people, it is very, very different from if there's 30 people.
Mm.
So maybe the system should be geared differently for the different levels, because if you are 30 people, then it's got to be more typing, it's got to be more buttons. Everybody can't talk at the same time, but you know, taking into account, what's the name of that number? Dunbar number. You know, that's got to come into it somehow, even if it's people you don't know, right?
Yeah, there are other sort of essentially purely technical sort of limitations and qualities to conversation over Zoom that complicate this, because at this point there's no possibility that we can have separate sidebar conversations that don't completely derail the main conversation without actually resorting to breakout rooms, which derail the main space. Whereas in a larger meeting, as I've done a lot at work, you can sidle up to somebody and whisper and determine whether it's relevant to try to bring it up to the whole of group. And so we don't have a lot of the bodily sort of abilities to kind of move things around. We also don't have the ability even to have 2 conversations simultaneously, which also occurs. So why I say that those are technical and why they also may be transient issues is that at least Apple has directional audio, a pretty reasonable system for that present in AirPods now. And also, at least in FaceTime, I don't know if other platforms have supported it. They certainly should be able to. Being able to direct sound as though it's coming from different directions on a screen, that can be taken further to amplify those sounds as people point in those directions, so that you can actually create a different locus of focus for one particular conversation, while still having sort of cocktail effect results from another. And to your point, Frode, last week you mentioned that the cocktail effect is no longer as significant for you, perhaps because of social mores and possibly because of the inexorable decline of hearing over time. But it's again not a universal, but it's something that it will be very interesting and I hope fairly transformative for us to be able to actually experience in a digitally mediated environment.
Yes, gesture, Mark.
Listening to Brenda, and just actually think back to your point, and it's perhaps like tangential, but again, thinking back to the relevance of gestures and things, and you brought up servicing. So, you know, when I was in an operations room, I would probably be listening effectively on about 3 to 4 nets at once and doing voice comms as well. So gesture doesn't, you know, if my face suddenly blanked or changed, you wouldn't know which of those things I was responding to. It's a bit of an edge case, but anyway, I just put it there for the narrative.
That's actually a really important part of the narrative. You know, when I can't remember the helicopter, but military helicopters stopped having microphone audio to everyone. It was only between the 2 people talking. The rate of accidents increased dramatically. So the background chatter was not noise, it was very, very useful. So if we could somehow find a way to allow for these different levels of communication to take place at the same time. Now, Randall, the AirPods Pro, I have them, I love them, but the microphone isn't very good when I'm outside. Maybe I need to do some kind of an upgrade or something. So that's why I don't use them very often. But the spatial audio is to the point where in my club and I'm listening to music, I often think that I've forgotten to turn the sound on here because it's so situated. So yeah, that is hugely, hugely useful. Very rarely do they even do that on the radio. But what do you guys think when you have an interview and you just listen to it, interviewer, subject are separated? Isn't that really kind of useful?
I love it. I love it. I always try to record in that same frame if I'm with someone. So it's like you're sitting in a room where a friend is here and I'm in this here. That I would really be curious about the personal preferences of people, because it can be a bit disorienting, but it makes it feel different. And that's kind of the advance of spatial audio, of what it affords us.
But when we go into it like a huge data pile of this, I mean, could you imagine going back and saying, I want to see the last 6 months of video in this community, but I don't want to hear anything Christopher said. Right. And I only want to hear the bits where they clearly agreed, etc. That kind of stuff, right?
There's great value. I wanted to come back to this point because it's very illustrative of this whole idea. We're in a group of 5 right now. And yet I made 2 notes in my notebook to say, I want to come back to this, because I couldn't carry through the same conversation. Now this group usually kind of can double in size, give or take. At larger numbers, it gets even harder to do this, but people also go back and watch the recordings. I know I do, and it would be incredible if I could get a cut of the most important bits, as maybe I prioritize them, or as you all in the group said, oh, this is what we found important from this meeting. Instead of going through 90 minutes where I might dip in and out of focus, it could be 5 minutes. And when I start thinking of building atop that and taking ideas from past calls, that gets much more palatable to say, oh, I'm going to dedicate 5 to 10 minutes to catch up. That's a use case of this feature. Now, with compression, you lose some of the context, so there is the give and take there. But for many people, that can be a huge advantage in terms of catching up to what's going on in the group.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, jesting aside, the point about, I want to hear all this except, person X is actually quite useful, because often it's a way often search often fails, because it's almost easy to define what you don't want, because you absolutely know that the search system's too dumb to be able to figure that out for itself, but it doesn't often give you a way, say, to fill it out, that sort of strand. So certainly having some sort of a tag as to the speakers is potentially a really useful device for future self.
So one of the things that came out of the expert interviews I'm doing for my PhD to evaluate visual meta and author reader is the fact that the software isn't all that easy to use. It takes a learning curve. But a few people have pointed that out, that is a good thing, because it's like learning to use an instrument. Of course, we shouldn't put any barriers in the way. But the kind of things I think we're talking about now is, how can we develop an environment that you can become a sculptor of this? I can edit in Photoshop and Final Cut like a pro. I fly in there because I like it and I'm used to it, been doing it my whole life. A lot of knowledge tools, of course, we've discussed this many times, they don't really allow you to do much other than click and remember a keyboard shortcut. But this could be an incredible case for shaping the dialogue, so to speak, in an entirely new multimedia way.
A future of text ambient mix.
Obviously, you're all huge fans of Lin Manuel Miranda, so otherwise I wouldn't talk to you. But has any of you seen Tick, Tick, Boom quite yet? Only asking because when Larson was still alive, he videotaped his whole apartment for insurance purposes to make sure everything was, he could account for everything. That has been used to recreate his apartment for the movie. That's a little bit, sorry, in the field of what we're talking about, isn't it? It's not in a virtual place, it's a physical place, but it was recreated. And, to look at the production process of that movie, how they went through different strands and decided what to recreate. Yes, a lot of other movies have done it. I just happened to be reading about it last night. But what if do people not understand that I'm talking to you guys? Sorry, I forgot to go, whoops, there we go. But that's only for a movie or a book. How can we do it for a new shape, a new organism? What is the thing? I mean, there's been experiments, of course, taking a video taking the frames and putting them so it's like a stretched out timeline. You can choose where to view and all of that stuff. But it will be fun to try to experiment with what the stuff of meetings is. You know, it doesn't have to be the video. That's the key thing. It could be the audio signal, can be anything.
You said something in this meeting that I keep referencing on Monday that requires a human in the loop, but it is very important. It is a summary that we might write from our takeaways from a call. So if there's a little bit of I took this away. So Brendan found value in this, Brandel found value in this aspect. People can follow threads or trails of how that might weave back to the overall call. And again, for people catching up, that could be very valuable. You could even build timelines over somebody's experience in calls. So I'm dreaming a bit there, but this wouldn't happen solely from programming a thesaurus. That's one aspect of many that's required to make this useful.
Yeah, this piece of clay needs a little bit of initial structure, and it needs a little bit of a statement of what it is from someone. Just parking that for a second, other things that could be really interesting to put into this is our calendars, whatever calendar we choose to make public to the group. For instance, to me, it's significant that this is the day after I published the book, right? So just have these things connected in the same environment to know about each other could be useful. And obviously, if it could do my photo stream, then we'll know interactions with my son today was his last day of school for this term. These are all memory events that help me remember significant work events too, So the shape of this is a really provocative opportunity.
One thing in terms of, again, it might be a bit tangential, but just in case it's something that people haven't come across, Ted Goranson and someone called Beth Cardia. I'll try and dig out some papers if people are interested, but he was looking at basically trying to derive narrative from video, which doesn't seem a long way from what you're talking about. It basically it goes back a long way to stuff happening in lettered agencies around the Beltway who are basically trying to work out, whether the guy in the video was saying "Blah, president" or not. So this is a long and storied background to it. And I remember him showing me a number of brain-meltingly complicated process diagrams. But clearly, someone with a much brighter person than myself was looking at that. I know it was sort of hinted at in the paper he presented at Hypertext 2017, and I don't know where all that work's gone. I suspect it's trundling along, and it's probably not be. It's one of those things that's really out there. It's not easy to pick up when you first see it. You say, well, it just seems so abstract. But this idea that effectively that you could do, you could effectively take a piece of video and audio and generate a synopsis from it. That's the sort of bit that seemed to link to what's just been mentioned. And as we carry on, I'll see if I can find a link to some of that stuff.
That makes me think of two things. One is something that Bill Buxton said about the process of writing a map versus simply observing it. He's got a really neat bit that he did at Microsoft Research 2011 or so, where he talked about the process of drawing it being so much more semantically interesting and relevant to somebody. And you also observe that with small children's drawings, which typically end up as just a whole mess of scribble. But the intentionality of the order in which those strokes go down, it makes it to be all the more meaningful. Even more disappointing when you realize that there was a moment just before they ruined it. And that also, I'm not sure if I mentioned the hierarchical tab-based history viewer that I built for web browsers many years ago, and I keep trying to push to get it into Safari. I need to find the right people to understand the value of it. But the idea is that browser history is an underutilized resource insofar as there are a lot of relationships and actions that we take within a browser that have significance and relevance, like the status of all of your tabs next to each other, as well as which tabs opened which other tabs, as well as which tab was active at any given time. And being able to create those trees of things I called forest, because it's a series of trees. And I didn't have any funnier kind of repartee for it than that. But I think that was really interesting because it meant that you have this collection of things that you can actually then pick off and label semantically as relevant for one thing or other. And many years later, I actually realized that it's a lot like Van Never-Bush, as we may think, in terms of being able to generate this representation of trails. And my wife is very angry at me for never having implemented it in the browser that she likes to use, because it means that you have these details and landmarks for which particular thing you got to something from. It makes it all the more memorable. But one of the things that was interesting for me is that as browsing patterns, as browsing devices changed, this was before the iPhone was released, that I made this with Firefox 2.5. What people do with browsers has changed. That we have a number of web apps now, and we also have activity off of the web. And so I'm really interested in, and don't have an answer to, what a more holistic sort of tree-based navigation of your entire computer interaction might actually consist of. It's a little bit harder to follow the relationships, but not impossible from an operating system level to be able to see the totality of somebody's actions.
Did you see the browser that me and Frode made?
Oh,
It's
no,
it's all a bit broken at the moment because I've had to move it to a new server. But basically, the idea was that you worked on a 2D zoomable space like Google Maps or whatever, that's fairly standard. And you had a node open, and we created
Chris,
the main demo.
it still works. It still works. Do you want a screen share?
The drag to open stuff doesn't work.
Okay.
It's a backend. I think I broke the back end when I moved it to the new server because it needs some URLs. It probably just needs some URLs updating. But the basic idea was that you could drag to open. So instead of taking a link and clicking it, you dragged a link and dropped it on the desktop, and it created a permanent connection, which worked at all. I'd say I think the demo is broken, but I've just remembered what's probably broken about the demo, and I imagine I just have to change the base URL in it because I moved it to a new server and haven't updated.
Chris, well, you get that ready. I just want to throw a quick thing in there that Brandel made me think about. When I worked with a friend, when I was here in the UK and she was in California, we worked in a startup. She was having a full-time job, but we did it on the sly, that kind of thing. What we did, and this is quite a few years ago, during the day, we would have an audio connection open, Skype or whatever it was. We wouldn't talk much, but it meant that if there was something, we would just say, oh, blah, 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 and it was there. So I'm wondering, in addition to these set meetings we have, if there is a dimension for those of us which will choose to more, like Mark Anderson and me, we tend to text each other. If it would be great to give permission for that to go into this community, because it is generally that there aren't very many let's go have a beer type things. It is in that case.
It's a more full and frank disagreement.
Anyway, Chris, did you find it? Did you fix it?
Nearly. It's basically it has got a hardwired URL because I'm that professional, and it's moving to an HTTP website because I haven't worked out how to set up HTTPS on the new location. So I just changed this HTTP chris.toddle.net.
Brought apple.com to its knees for less, don't worry.
Sorry, I did what?
I've brought apple.com to its knees for less sillier problems.
I've taken out the electronics computer science department at the university many years ago, back when I was very young and I had to go and sort out a DNS thing, and I didn't know you couldn't have hyphens in DNS entries, and we had no checks or balances, so it just tried to make a DNS with a hyphen and took us off the internet. No, I don't think this is going to work. I'll give it one more try, but I think
it was a bit like there was never anything on the front of a VHS recorder telling you not to post jam sandwich into it, as many smart people have discovered.
I'm still not quite getting it.
It would be interesting if there was a interaction thing in these meetings where, if the meeting is known to finish soon, you click the end button and it says, would you like to say what this meeting was about?
Yeah.
And if you can't, are you sure you should have been in it?
Yeah, like a summary, a human summary, and we all say, this was a boring one, or this was in depth talking about this or that or whatever.
To make this very practical, use case wise, community, journal, newsletter, summarizing yeah, summarizing these things summarizing our meetings in a condensed way.
I've got it to work. I've fixed it.
Nice.
Just briefly, Brendan, your otter, the keywords at the top of the screen, was that generated humanly or was that automatically seen, or how was that?
Let me open it, but those are automatically seen. It's just the frequency and it kind of bubbles up to like a word cloud of sorts.
Chris, why don't you just share screen?
Yeah, sure. I'm not used to this. Is it on under stop? Nope, it's not there. Where is it on here?
It's the
Oh,
button
it's a
that
big
says
green.
share
So
screen.
it's a green button that says share screen. Okay.
Yeah.
How very
Green.
yeah. Let me
Which
just
often needs re-enabling after you've updated the software.
yeah. I'm
Involving you
just,
logging out and logging in again.
making sure I share the right screen. That one. Okay. Okay. So you should see me playing a little bit. I can zoom out. This was originally designed because the Vice Chancellor bought a touch table and had no use for it, and I was kind of coming up with an app that would look cool on a touch table. So it really wasn't designed to be a good thing. It was designed to be a quick. So this is a node in a Wikipedia page. Everything under one heading, so I can. It doesn't do whole pages in one go. This doesn't have any sections. Obviously, it used Douglas Engelbart as a default to make everyone happy. But you end up being able to create a history of your searching, and you can zoom out, you can minimize stuff, and it tries to use the icon from the Wikipedia page and so on. And there's a few other features of this. You can script it with, you can create an iframe that can remote control it and get both changes and send changes. So if you wanted to control it with your own application, you can make a local host application that you open in an iframe, it's web page in an iframe. That web page then has permission to modify and analyze the current things going on. For the benefit of one of the professors, we made a murder board style thing. You can also add notes.
Okay, well, hang on, this is important to highlight. The reason the red lines aren't straight, they're falling down a bit. It's supposed to be a TV show where they have all kinds of things on the wall because they're trying to solve a murder, so it looks like a red string.
Also popular meme, which is actually from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. But, and it also does a little clever thing which we came up with, which my YouTube suggestions is always going to be exciting.
Yeah, of course.
Like
Warhammer,
Victoria Christmas pudding. Warhammer, let's go with the Warhammer Christmas pudding. When I paste it, it uses the fancy things that Facebook does to get the actual metadata. So you get a preview instead that it got from the site. That works with sites that do these open link previews. And we've also got the other feature is my blog, and I think Frode's, is it enabled on your one, Frode? The plugin for copy?
Yeah, I don't think we turned it off actually.
I'll do it on the line, definitely know it works on just for speed. Web team. And what this does is it hijacks your copy.
Just to pause for a second to fill everyone in. This was in our discussion on high resolution copying. And this is what Chris called augmented copy, based obviously on Doug language, which I've now myself taken to heart as well. So he selected, and there's a little dot, which used to be the dot we used to hyperwords back in the day. And he just made it much more exciting.
By default, if you copy by default, it warns you it's doing something odd. And if I copy, it does a little pop-up just because it's technical term is fucked with your normal copying, and it's put a div around the HTML version of the copy with all the metadata it has available. So the article, where in the article, when it was copied, and any authoring information. And when I go back into here, he says, there it goes. I've got an actual citation in there. I zoom in a bit, it's on zoom. If you want to zoom like that. And so it knows the actual source of the thing, and it stores metadata with it. It knows when I copied it and when I pasted it. When I go back, the JavaScript in the page gave us a fragment identifier, which contained both the ID of the fragment followed by a magic bit of code to say the offset in code. the offsets. Offsets in media, of course, are a nightmare, and different media have different offsets and character sets and bytes. But it does its best, and it tries to highlight where your selection was. So you actually are doing a proper deep link into a web page, as people don't do anymore.
Chris, I just sent you an email question about this, by the way, if it can
Cool.
output to visual meta and stuff. So just be aware, you'll have to reply to
Sure. Basically, this is code me and Frode. Well, I wrote it with Frode.
Well, I read it.
Yes, with Frode making frantic hand gestures with regard to what it should do. But so it's a lot more minimalist than it probably would be if I'd written it by myself. I would have, Frode basically got me to turn off features quite a lot, which is an interesting experience for me. Try and find, oh, that's because we were back to there. So if I go back to, it doesn't have a save or anything yet. There is really nice ways it could. What I do have, if I paste that again, there's the fancy enable developer features, which gives you lots more fiddling around and options here. If I go back to the Wikipedia search, one other thing was we looked at what are they called? Those fancy things, what people do in view specs. So I think, is it in this version? No, it might not be in this version. There was a way to rejig the page to view it as a completely different view.
Chris, I had to reply to an email regarding Bent.
Okay, so I should leave it there anyway. You've got that.
No, hang on. I wasn't paying attention for a minute. I apologize. When you took the high-res link and you pasted it in this space, what happened? Can you please show that again?
Okay, when I pasted it, I'll go through and go in more detail.
I don't need the detail. I just need the results.
Oh, okay. What happened was I copied it. It made an HTML, fancy HTML copy, which embedded a load of hidden metadata. When I went to Weblo, Weblo understands if the outer div, I'll just open another one. Weblo understands that if the outer div contains some certain magic codes, then it can interpret it as metadata about the thing being pasted. It's pretty unreliable because it comes out differently between every browser and things. It's very much a proof of concept at this stage, but just showing people that it's an option is kind of nifty because we leave so much information on the table when we copy.
So obviously I would like that to be compatible with Visual Meta.
Mm-hmm.
And please go back to the page where you copied from. That's a WordPress plugin you have, right?
Yes, it's primarily a JavaScript plugin.
So that WordPress plugin, could it be made relatively easily so that it knows the author of that page, the author as defined by who WordPress sees the author as being?
It does.
Right. So that means, so that means that you almost have a plugin, because this goes so far back, that if used with the visual meta paradigm, it could allow you to cite from a web page with the author's name included. That's and high resolution. That's very nice. So now you know what you have to implement this weekend.
Oops, that's the wrong. I might be getting drunk. That is a very constant problem.
But I do like the idea. Also, I do like the idea of view specs because it does seem that all too often that a particular visualization is seen as an endpoint rather than just a different view. In other words, you're looking at the data. You have to be looking at a particular view of the data. Whereas we're normally, the way we're fed things is we go into effectively a blind alley where that visualization is the end point. You can't just toggle to another view, rather like the stuff that Adam was doing for us.
I don't know what the remote control. We had this little remote control tool that I wrote for this, but I can't remember what it's called. But Weblo control, that's probably it. Weblo control remote control. Yes, that looks right. Okay. So what you can do is you can give it the name of a web page, which goes in the sidebar. HTTP conquer. God, I feel exposed not having an S on the end of that, even though it'll all work fine. and then open that. And I think, nope, that hasn't seeming to. No, what that should do is open a fancy thing up there, and I'll worry about that another time. There should be a way to remote control it with an iframe that sends JavaScript queries. But one of the things we did talk about doing was having it so Frode's word processor could actually describe the layout of the page as a set of nodes, and it would just keep them up to date. And as you typed in sections, menus would just appear, it would actually create visual nodes for all the parts in the document that could then be moved around and interacted with here, linked to other things as concepts, or even creating new ones and have them appear on the back on the word processor. That's sort of the extreme graph view when you have two word processor documents, you're linking them together both at the same time using that. I'm not sure if that's useful or not, but it's kind of cool. I'm going to have to get ready soon because I've got to go out in a quarter of an hour.
Somebody must have questions or comments.
This is gorgeous. It's really, really exciting to see such a nice representation. One of the things that I've been toying with recently is the sense in which it would be entertaining to have an obligation to retain a tangible representation of every given page view that you have, such that, you know, it's essentially like you're printing it out. Not so wasteful as to have paper. Also, paper is less useful in that you can't Control F on it, you can't do a bunch of stuff. But to have like by default a tangible trail of objects that you compose and create. And so yeah, I think that having a navigable space like this is really interesting. I mean, one of the challenges that
very much his trails do not fade kind of vibe is what we're going for.
Yes, absolutely.
A big sorry, I've just realised I have some things to pack up that I have to get ready because someone's picking me up. But basically, you can also export this as an HTML document, but what we imagined this is a teaching thing where you could create you could browse around things you thought were interesting for the topic for research and have your research sort of stuff all in one place as sort of a history of what you thought was important and things. You could create one of these, curate it, and use it as a teaching document or for a group for with the remote control system. There's no reason several people can't be editing it at the same time like you would in Google Docs. The entire system works thanks to a very, very frustrating but entirely clever challenge from Map Parent. Mark, and what's his name? He's Map Parent in my email.
Oh, Marc-Antoine Parent.
That's it.
Yeah.
Who I worked with for 18 months online and then met in person. We discovered we had over a foot of difference between us. We had always just looked eye to eye for entire relationship. But he suggested a rewrite, which we did, which was it's entirely event-based. So every action gets described as an event that is then, when you drag something, it's not really moved until the system acknowledges it, so that everything can go through, every event can be sent to the external people watching, and they can update a system and send events back. So the idea was it could be done as an event-based
Chris, but before you go, can you please show something normal, not a metadata one? Because there's one thing you talked about, but you didn't really highlight.
What's that?
Just turn that one into a normal view, please.
Okay, define normal.
Not metadata, like a default, just text view.
Oh, right, this one, yeah, sure.
Default, yeah. Right, is there a link in there? Right, so.
There's a link to me.
Show me one that has a link, because I just want to show you doing the dragging out thing and how it changes, like the little pill thing we had. Yeah, like that. So when that is dragged out, you see now in the show where it came from as well, please.
That one didn't come from anywhere because it came from the base. But if I take sugar from here.
Yeah. Then so the point is not the sugar there. The point is in the box in the top left where he clicked to drag. That sugar has a dotted line around it and it's faded. I think that's one of Chris's interesting innovations, that it's not just a link. It has to come from somewhere and it's always the same thing. So you can't just, I mean, you could clone it, sure, but conceptually it's one thing.
Yeah, and if you had something else which mentioned sugar, let's see, if I move to lump sugar up here, then well, hopefully, if it mentions sugar again, which it's not going to, just to be difficult. It's got sugar cane, sugar beet, sugar mills. Come on. I just want
Sugar
the
milk
word
should have
sugar.
sugar.
Yeah, there you go.
There you
There's
go. But the word sugar is grayed out. What it doesn't do is show the link to that directly, but you know, it could or something. Sugar doesn't do anything. If I close the sugar tab wherever it's gone, it will actually it's over here. Where's delete? Remove. Yeah, so sugar is now highlighted and it is selectable. So, I mean, this was quite a lot of clever under the hood stuff to think about to get it right, but it's there for people to play with. Please help yourself. I don't plan to do much work on it now. I think it's a good point to show people the idea. It's all on GitHub. It's mostly written in JavaScript with some PHP to sit on the server to do any requests that JavaScript's not allowed to do. Because JavaScript can't do certain callbacks to other sites, so that's being done.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting part of the potential infrastructure we have to play with.
Yeah. Yes, my challenge for this evening, by the way, is to pack up 3 very fragile tanks and get them somewhere in a car ride away. So this is, I've got 3 of these to pack up. So
an aspect I like is the thing of moving beyond the starting point. It's very interesting. More often than not, lots of things like this. There's always the assumption always seems to be that you want to know where you've been, which is sort of interesting. But the more and even more interesting part to me is having got that is to say, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, now I've found this. Actually, this really where this belongs in the map is here. So now you move from the discovery to the sense making, and it also I sort of something sort of years of the large hypertext sort of knowledge base I've written for other people is sort of refactoring it is an interesting and challenging problem without, you know, when you want to move content around within the sort of the whole thing, and to do it without leaving any pieces on the floor is always proved more challenging than I thought.
So I'm trying to stack tanks.
So that's a feature you forgot when you made them. The lack of a stackable feature.
What to make things into? Well, one of the things in my original idea of this was, I really like the idea of being able to drop things into folders and have everything sort of point into that folder and just know the things in the folder and be able to hide things away. I kind of liked the idea of using this when I was pretending I was going to finish my PhD, which is why I'm so impressed with Frode getting this far. I just discovered I hate writing research papers, which was a big problem for my topic was scholarly communication, so that was great. So that's why I got introduced to Frode in the first place. So like, Chris, you'll understand what he's talking about. You might care, and I did, sadly. The scholarly communication side was one thing, but I wanted something where I was doing literature reviews and stuff that I could put things in piles and sort of, I wanted an infinite desk where I could just make stacks of things and think about things. And I wanted ideally to be able to have a research paper on it that I could just see the icon for, but if I kept zooming in far enough, I could actually see the reference, like I could see the introduction and the full text, and then I could zoom into the full text, into the references and just keep zooming forever. And that just seemed reasonable to me. And everyone else said that's completely unreasonable and that's not how it works. And rather than fix it, I just lost heart at the end. But you know, so but that's what should happen. You should just be able to keep, you know, zooming on that. But it's all conceptually one thing without. Now I want to backput from my original context, put those things I want to bring up to the top level context. I make the first class things in my main desktop. Those other things don't worry about. Move these things into here, process it in file folder like that. Sort these visually into by year and. Oh no, by date I added them, and you know, like this is what I want to be able to do without having to break a sweat because I'm lazy.
So in closing, for the transcript and for us, in closing today, what I want to see obviously is that this can export its entirety to Visual Meta, so that not only can it be put in a document as a single little reference and then explode back into this, but also so that Brandel can take it into VR and manipulate it in affordances that can only be done then. And then if he wants to put it back in a PDF or to put it back straight into here, it can be done. we need these augmented copy data structures. I mean, JSON and all of that is nice, but it's quite explicit in Visual Meta because Visual Meta is based on BibTeX, of course. So Chris and Brandel, you two should have a little bit of arm wrestling one day, I think.
I'm just wondering what
this is. Go ahead, Mark.
No, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to make enthusiastic noises about it. I think that the ability to create a map, being obliged to make a map is really nice. I think I'm actually not familiar with what is the best sort of pricey of view spec. So I'd be eager to learn what is meant by that from this group, because it sounds as though it's sort of the ability to reconfigure sort of a different graph of views, and that is something that is challenging and very, very useful. Being able to create things like Core and Herald fast multiscale network graphs and things like that is really valuable to be able to kind of rearrange things in something that approaches a semantic relevance for people without sort of breaking the bank in terms of the visual cognitive load. One of the things that it makes me think about is the fact that we are conveniently sort of in a place of a poverty of signals with regard to our interactions with a particular sort of document. And that may be an adequate sort of subset of things to encode about it. But as you were talking about as Chris was talking about the copy and paste times, it also made me think, wouldn't it be nice to know what the battery level was, or what direction the computer was facing in, or all of these other sort of attendant factors of what it was that was happening at the time that this decision was made. And so if you sort of take that further and think about the conversations, the other applications that are running in the background, these are all encodable kind of pieces of information, but you sort of quickly run out of, thank you very much, Mark. I'll take a look. You quickly realize that you need to sort of copy the entire universe, but it's I think that there are some really interesting sort of opportunities once you start incorporating more broadly than just the immediate proximal sort of actions. And yeah, no, it's really cool. Obviously, as you have noticed, Chris, that there are performance issues as you sort of increase these things, and you start to have to care about some of the technical solutions of what you load and unload and things like that. But there are people who are sort of more technical interested in those things without the sort of conceptual application. So one only needs to do enough to be able to get it interesting for them to be able to continue with it. So yeah,
you want to be able to do something that isn't just kiddie. That's the only problem with this, that kids, it's currently at demo level, and we haven't really, it didn't have a good save feature, so we don't really know where it would go. Someone used it in anger. So the save feature is probably key.
Something worth adding to this is, each one of these objects has a good amount of meta, and I would really like it if this is exploded into a VR view and moved around, but then when it goes back, it still has XY coordinates or positional coordinates, obviously more than XY, that cannot be used in this 2D view, but it haven't been lost. So when you then explode it back out, you have the option to put it back to this or not, depending on your use case. But in terms of the technical considerations, I'm just such a fan of the Apple M1 series of chips that I think we're at a time now where these kinds of things are beginning to get possible. So I'm just a childish enthusiast when it comes to that.
Is it? I don't know how close or if it's possible. It'd be interesting to sort of see now we're into the second sort of run of future of text, is to take those articles and put them into something like this. I mean, I'm trying in my mind's eye to work out sort of what degree of probably further encapsulation or extraction that needs. But that would be exactly, because it's exactly this ability to have a place-based, draw new lines, and just sort of surface potential links between the information. And again, it speaks to this non-linear thing, not having to consume the book from front to back in sequential order, but being able to just sort of put, again, it's the sort of things that are more salient and things that are less salient, sort of push them out to the edges, or to perhaps make them less obvious or something, to not lose them completely, but to see how they dovetail, because arguably, well, it should lead to interesting observations, like there may be something that doesn't seem to link to anything, which ought to be should be an insight in itself. It's not certainly, because it's not what you'd expect, or vice versa. You may find an article that on the face of it is just an article, but actually proves to be a sort of a prime linkage within the corpus. So that's why I think these sort of spaces are really useful. And getting back to, I put on the sidebar for Brunel. I mean, I just picked that up, but I mean, I share the same confusion. View specs is a term that people of a certain generation seem to understand, or those who are in the computer biz back there. I don't think it ever particularly got taken up. And although you could, I mean, you'll always have people argue. People say, well, Word has view specs, it's print view versus layout view. But in reality, most apps have sort of one view. I mean, one that I'm used to using is East Coast Tinderbox. Actually has about 5, 6 that are all there at any one time. You can just toggle between them. But the notion of view specs that I think was very much at the heart of what Doug was looking at in Augment, this idea that effectively you have the common data underneath and you view it in the manner you need to for the task you have at hand, rather than in effect. I mean, whereas in a word processor, yes, you can probably look at it as an outline versus the finished text, but that's all process related. That's not saying, can I see this document in a completely radically different way, organized on some completely different axis, perhaps. Yeah. And Frode's tool is also speaking to that same thing in terms of the concept map.
Yeah, yes, yeah. I wasn't going to go into that aspect of it now, because I really have to go, unfortunately. But it is things like show only first line of every paragraph. It can be quite basic things, and it can be hugely advanced. I just wanted to show you guys this innovation that a few seconds ago I got a new build of. And that is differentiating between links that go out of a document or a page and links that go within it. Mm-hmm. I've spent the last 20 years thinking about it, and I think I have a solution. So here in author now, when I do this, I can choose to make a link to a heading, right? And you notice that the font is different. Mm-hmm. The font now is the font of the headings. So when we now go to reader, make it a bit bigger, you see these are heading fonts. So that's a hint. They're not all working now because there's a document I had to edit. That's why the cursor didn't change. But expected affordances, go to page 70, click, boom, goes to page 70. Doesn't that communicate that that's what it is?
What does the external link look like, just for comparison's sake?
Oh, that would just be normal underlined.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying to distinguish this kind of in some of my own stuff too. Like we're building a network notebook, and there's a lot of interlinking, and having a good signal to something that's within the text and then without or outside of it is important. I think this works. I'd have to kind of noodle on it a little bit. What led you to the idea of selecting the heading font?
Oh, this page is the most important page of my PhD, this double page spread. So I have a wonderful advisor, Dave Millard. The other ones are wonderful too, but he's particularly wonderful because he's really engaged. And he told me I have to have a graph showing how I've done this. And I usually am a very graph-centered person, but because of the, I built this as all about text. Anyway, he forced me to do this meeting this week. And then I want all the little boxes in here to relate to what I'm writing in prose around it. I started with background. Okay, that means background. Everything is really clear in maps. What he said, which was really useful, where he said that the introduction to the thesis has to provide a clear presentation of the problem, the approach, and what you've done. If that's clear, then they'll forgive a lot in the rest of the work. But if it isn't clear, chances are you'll recover as really small. So that's why I've been, as they say, noodling around this. So in terms of the design, initially there was nothing. When you were in author, it would have a bounding box around it to tell the author, and this would be like a cute little bonus. So then I started experimenting with maybe making it bold, maybe this, maybe that. And then it just struck me that in author, you can only link to headings. You cannot link to arbitrary locations. So then the chances are that this would either be the same heading or it would at least refer to it explicitly. Why not make it a heading font? It may not work in every use case, but it's that was the thinking behind it.
Why can you only link to a heading?
Because you have to have an address to link to. So that means in our case, you can link to an image.
Yeah, I mean,
you can link to a heading. I don't have the machinery to say link to this section on page so and so. Of course, that kind of high resolution linking is something we do want at some point.
No, it's interesting, and it wasn't sort of that wasn't said in an adversarial way. Something I'm noodling on at the moment is repulsing in another community, the cult of Rome have turned up at the gates and are moaning that everything isn't a block or something, because that's all it knows how to address. And trying to get into the sense of, well, what in that is useful and what is actually just because you know no better is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's the tension that arises is that, as sort of Chris was mentioning, that you have been instrumental in doing for him, Frode, is keeping features at bay, and that's because a software package is a value system, and what it emphasizes and what it's for has to be made manifest through what is important and what is accessible within it. And so I can definitely see the argument that if you start opening the doors to linking arbitrarily to every single piece of it, then it also renders the potential emphasis that much weaker, that it's a necessary kind of constraint or a valuable constraint to be able to kind of make use of.
It also has another effect in that people overlook is it actually has quite an effect on the way you write within that system, which is I think one of the sort of the elephant in the room of a lot of discussions going on around linkage is that if you need to use links and you can only link to certain things, then you have to work within the constraints of that. And that's not that and that in itself is not a bad thing. It only gets interesting, and a lot of people don't understand that they think they're working in a very open system, and they're actually working in a quite closed one. And then when, of course, two tribes meet, there's the inevitable warfare.
I mean, obviously, we want to go towards an environment where, just like in the physical world, you can address anything. Go down on the Red House and take a left or whatever it might be. Really wonderful discussion today, guys. I look forward to Monday. Friday, I may have some interesting news. I don't know yet, but it's looking good. And Brendan, thank you for doing actual footwork and getting the transcription thing to something much more useful. And Chris, thanks for coming in and destroying everything by showing potential and then running away.
I'm sorry for making so much noise. I've got to get all this ready.
Chris's head is still here.
Yeah, I know. Just that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
okay, it's all good. Have a great weekend, everyone. Anything else, or are we all just looking forward to Monday?
That's it. I'll see you on Monday.
Quickly for Brandel, if you want any more on the either of those things I put in the sidebar, just shoot me an email.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm definitely interested in following them up.
Shoot
them
already.
Love that.
Put effort in with anyone who wants to get up to speed with Webflow and do anything with it is absolutely fine. I'm just not putting more effort in to convince people it's interesting, because I think it already does that. So if people want to do something with it, I don't mind doing a bit of support on that.
I definitely desperately would like to have some sort of visual meta communication with it, because it would help my PhD. So there. Bye, guys.
Yeah.